All right, so number 3, we're going to start adding some complexity to our model. We had some assumptions that were built in earlier that were probably not that realistic, so I've modified our table and we're going to start putting some constants up here at the top. So let's start with inflation rate. This one's a tough one. I mean, there's probably going to be some inflation. Over time, though, inflation, the rate has tended to get smaller over time rather than larger. You're just going to have to guess what a realistic one is for you. Right now, inflation in the United States is barely over 1% per year. I'm going to just put in 2%. I can't predict the future. Nobody else can either. But I think you need to have something that looks like a realistic inflation rate baked into your model because, again, when you get that 3 point something million dollars in the future, it's not going to be worth 3 point something million dollars. It's going to be worth something less than that. Okay. Now, the other thing that was unrealistic was in our model, we presume that this person never gets a raise. And that's not really the way people's careers go. Typically, they start off at some salary, but then over time, they get raises and they actually make more money. So let's just say I feel like when you construct these models for yourself, you need to be conservative, which means that if it's a bad thing like inflation, you probably need to make the number a little bit larger, error on the side of making it a little bit larger. And then if it's something that's good for you, like your raises, to be conservative, you make it smaller, right? So what I'm going to say is that although this person is living in a world where there's 2% inflation, they're going to get a raise of 2.5% per year. Now, I realize this is not the way people get their raises. People go years and years and years without any raise whatsoever, and then maybe they get a promotion, they get a 10 or 15 or 20 or 30% raise or whatever. But again, we're just trying to create some models here for planning purposes. So I'm going to say the raise rate here is 2.5%. Savings rate. We had that before, and we just used it, and we built it into the formula down here, but we want to be able to monkey with that a little bit. So I'm going to say the savings rate is 10%, and the ROI we'll say is 10%. Now, usually about this time, people are like, which funds? Where do I find these things? What I recommend is that you look for a company called Vanguard. I think the VFINX fund is their S&P 500 indexed fund, but look for something like their S&P 500, their Wilshire index fund, the Russell 2000, whatever, something like that fits your risk profile. This is where, look, I'm an IT geek and I'm a spreadsheet guy. I'm not a financial advisor, so some of these things you're just going to have to kind of figure out for yourself based on your risk tolerance. And there's another thing that we'll talk about in a future video, which is that would you leave all this stuff tied up in the stocks your entire working career? Most financial advisors advise that you don't do it, so it's probably a terrible idea. But I want to go ahead and give you some tools that you can use to try and decide whether it's a good idea for you or at what point you would start transitioning into bond funds or something that has a guaranteed rate of return. But again, just for your personal research, start by looking at Vanguard funds, and then this is one that's an example. So, that having been said, this person's salary in year one is $45,000, and their savings, what we're going to do is take this and multiply the salary times the savings rate. All right, and then I'm going to hit F4 here for those of you that don't work with Excel that much. That goes ahead and makes us an absolute cell address, so it always points up here. All right, so he's going to save $4,500, return on investment. In the first year, they don't have a return on investment. Now, one thing people will say is, hey, look, throughout the course of this year, I'm saving money. So, like, even in month one, I'm going to save like, $400 or something, $380 or thereabouts. That money's invested. It should have a rate of return too. If you're really concerned about this, what you can do is say that half of your savings rate for the year on average is going to be your balance for the year, and then multiply it times your return on investment rate. Okay, so this is the way the math for that would work. I have constructed spreadsheets with this probably a little bit closer to realistic, but here's what it is not. It's not conservative, right? So this is something that's good for you because it puts more money in your pocket. Again, as you're constructing these models, I would say tend toward conservatism. So, if it's important to you to make this reflect reality a little bit better, you could modify your spreadsheet this way. I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to say that your ROI is always based on previous year's total and work from there. All right, so salary now is going to be previous year's salary times 1 plus the raise rate. Close it up. Okay, so this guy worked really hard and he got a 2.5% raise. Woohoo! Look at him. All right. So again, I know that this isn't reflective of the way things happen in the real world. I'm just trying to make this a situation where this guy isn't making the same money for years and years on end. Most people probably make a little bit more money over the course of their working lives. Savings, we can just copy that down. ROI, we're going to take the previous year's total times ROI rate. Again, I'll hit F4, hit enter, boom. He makes $450 return on his investment. And then this formula looks good. So let's copy this guy another year and make sure that he's tracking with what we'd like. Yeah, everything's looking pretty good. And now, woohoo, he's making $50,000 a year. God bless these young kids coming right out of college. Copy it down until he's 67. All right, well, something really bad just happened. What just happened here that was so horrible? Oh, I didn't do an absolute cell address. See, this is what happens when you're too cool for school. Just go ahead and correct this for you, because with any luck, you guys are going to be creating your own spreadsheets too. All right, so here we go. This guy starts at $45,000 a year. He ends up making $136,000 a year. We still haven't factored in the role of inflation. But okay, so in raw numbers now, because he actually makes a little bit more money than he did in previous models, he ends up with $4.6 million. So he actually ends up with more money than what he had been making before. All right, now inflation. What I'm going to do is put in an inflation factor. All right, this is a little bit theoretical. Just bear with me. What I'm going to say is in year one, his inflation factor is 1.0. And by that, what I mean is that $1 in 2016, we're going to divide it by 1, and then $1 in 2016 is going to be equal to $1. I know that sounds really weird, but we're going to say inflation adjusted total. All right, so what we're going to do is take the total here and then divide it by the inflation factor. All right, what did we just prove? We proved that in the year 2016, $4,500 is equal to $4,500 $2016. All right, that really seems pretty obvious, but here's where the math starts becoming important, is that I'm going to start multiplying this inflation factor times inflation. So we'll take this times boom, 1.02. Okay, so what does that mean? In year two, he has $9,500, but it's really only $9,375 in 2016 dollars. Inflation nibbled away at this. So nominally speaking, his bank account says $9,563, but this $9,563 only buys what $9,300 would have bought in 2016. All right, let's copy this thing down. You're just going to have to trust me that this is true. Oh, we got things blowing up probably again because I didn't put in an absolute cell address, and I did not. So we'll say F4. All right, and start copying you down again. All right, much better. And this starts making a big difference, right? So remember when I said before that this person was going to save $3-point-some-odd million. Well, it's not worth $3-point-some-odd million. So if you at the end of this guy's working career, he has $4.6 million. In 2016 dollars, though, that's only $1.8 million, almost $1.9 million. Okay, that's still a big old bunch of money. So again, don't let inflation keep you from doing this. This person is way better off having done this, even though inflation is just gobbling up big chunks of his money. But in 2016 dollars, he has almost $2 million. All right, so what does this mean in terms of his ability to retire? Rule of thumb that financial planners use is that you can withdraw 4% of whatever you have accumulated, probably basically for the rest of your life if you're wisely invested, and still retire. So what we say is then his $1.8 million, that should provide him an income of $75,000 a year. So throw in, his Social Security, probably another $20,000, $30,000. Well, This person's going to replace a big chunk of his pre-tax income prior to retirement. He's going to be able to get $75,000 a year just as in terms of 4% of his savings balance. Add Social Security, and this person can probably retire and not really suffer a substantial setback in terms of their standard of living. So the 4% rule, that's what 4% is all about. Now, let's make this thing even a little bit more complicated. All right, so savings, this is just the savings this individual is putting in just themselves, just their individual savings. All right, well, what if they get a match from their employer? And I don't know. I mean, a match depends on your employer. Some employers don't offer any match. A lot of employers do, though. And so if you've got one, a reasonable match might be 3 or 3.5% if you're putting in 10% of your money. So let's go ahead and say the match is equal to salary times 0.03. All right, so now when we get the total then, it's also plus the match. Boom. Copy this guy all the way down. Then when we get to the total here, we're also going to add in the amount of the match. Boom. Okay, $6 million, $98,000 a year if you take 4%. So, a little 3% employer match actually makes a big difference here. All right, well, what if your employer doesn't make a match? What can we do now? I'm going to go ahead and delete this. It's going to cause an error. All right, let me go ahead and fix the error. So I'm referring to a cell that no longer exists. All right. What can you do if your employer doesn't offer a match? Well, here's what you can do. And this is what I would recommend young people to try to do. Okay, instead of saving 10% your entire career, look, I'm sympathetic. It is very difficult to save money your first year out of college. Why? You're probably buying a car and a wardrobe, and you're saving money to buy a house. And you may have a romantic interest in your life, and you're going to save some money for a wedding or an engagement ring or furniture for your house or any number of things. It's very expensive when you're very young, right? So realistically, a lot of people, they just can't save 10%. Well, what can you do? All right, what I would say is save what you can. Maybe start with 5%. All right, so, but here's the deal now. The next year, when you get your raise, save a little bit more. So, we'll say 5.5%, right? Then the next year, try and save 6%. Every time you get a raise, stuff a little portion of that raise into your savings. Okay, so pay yourself here, right? So then, here we'll go with 6.5% now. Whoops, 6.5. Then 7%. 7.5%. You get the idea here. 8.5%. And so on. And this is where spreadsheets can be really valuable because you can actually calculate the value of these little tiny changes. 9%. All right, well, now all of a sudden we're pretty close to having 10% savings, right? So it was really not very easy to do the first year. But over the course of your working life now is at 9.5%. Now he's at 10%. Okay, he's good to go. So let's say, I don't know, he works for a few years and he saves 10%, but then, he decides, all right, well, it's time to save 12% now. Whoops. Times 0.12. There we go. All right. So now he's going to save 12% for a while. And then, he's going to save 13% for a while. And then 14%. So you get the idea here. Over the course of this person's working life, they're just gradually upping this. They're trying to find a point where, it's not going to hurt too bad. I'm not going to have to, start eating bologna sandwiches for 2 out of my 3 meals a day, whatever, 0.15. All right, and then you just up this percentage over time. And in that way, if you can't save a lot of money earlier in your career, then you can still end up in roughly the same place in life. So $4.4 million, they did great, right? So and also, early in your career, just see if you can make it hurt. So the other thing to consider is, here, let's say the typical person that says, "Oh my goodness, I can't save 10% of my pay." All right, well, let me just give you a little perspective here. All right, so he's saving $4,500 over the course of the whole year. So if we divide that by 52, he's saving $83 a week. $83 a week. All right, well, that's only part of the story here, because if he's saving this money in a 401k or TSP, 403b, 401a, some tax advantage savings account, then he wasn't going to get all $83. This is the pre-tax amount of his savings, and he gets to save it. Okay, he was only going to get 20% of it. So like this times 0.8, right? So, well, something went really wrong there. This guy times 0.8. All right, so it's costing him $66 a week to save 10% of his pay. So, this guy that starts off saving only 5% of his pay, it's only costing him $33 a week. For another $33 a week, he just really supercharges his savings and puts his whole life almost on a different footing. So, again, adjusting for inflation, you can still do really great. So that's the third in the series of videos. Hope you found these enjoyable. Next one I'm going to do is on investment fees, because it's definitely something to look out for. It's something not a lot of people can help, but there are ways to avoid fees. One of them is by choosing inexpensive funds to work with. But for the most part, a lot of folks like HR people and folks that are setting up retirement accounts need to know this. And also, when you talk to a financial advisor, you need to be asking them questions about this, because they want your money. Your money becomes their money once they take it. So that's all we've got for this one. Inflation does not destroy your savings goals, and you can even factor in some mild increases in your salary over time. And really, you can be right on track for a comfortable retirement.